What's up, guys? I'm the creator of ShockOS. You can call me Carson, and today we're going to talk about ShockOS, like why I chose to program it, what it's for, and the certain features that I programmed into it. So, let's dive into it. Alright, now what or who is ShockOS for? Now, before I answer that question, I'm going to tell you what ShockOS is not for. It's definitely not an everybody Linux distribution that's supposed to be able to work for absolutely anything you could possibly imagine, because there are some Linux distributions that try to do that and they definitely do not do it very well, especially with the Raspberry Pi, because there are so many different uses, infinite uses that you could use a Raspberry Pi for. So I'll tell you what it's not. It's not for an embedded fridge tablet or a robot brain or stuff like that. That's not what ShockOS is for. ShockOS is for the growing number of people that want to use their Raspberry Pi as a full-on daily drivable desktop computer. Because especially with a quad-core 64-bit ARM processor and up to 8 gigabytes of RAM, the Raspberry Pi 4 isn't a bad option for a basic desktop computer, and that's exactly what ShockOS is for, a desktop computing operating system. That's what it is. So, why did I create ShockOS? I created ShockOS to fill a void. When I was looking for a desktop operating system on my Raspberry Pi, I came across a lot of options that were either had one of the following problems. They were too bare bones, too bloated, or super poorly optimized shovelware, or maybe they just didn't use the package base that I liked. For example, I like Debian operating systems, and maybe they were an Arch-based operating system, and I just couldn't really accept that. You know, I like Debian, but that's just me. So it had at least one of those problems, and I kind of decided, you know what, I'm just gonna make my own. So I decided to use Raspberry Pi OS as a base because that was by far, hands down, the best one, because it had the best compatibility and the best optimization by far for the Raspberry Pi. So I used that as a base, Raspberry Pi OS Lite to be more specific, and then after trying multiple different desktop environments on the Raspberry Pi, I decided to go with Mate. I know it's properly pronounced Mate, but I'm just gonna pronounce it Mate, like, good day, mate, because gotta just deal with it. Anyway, so I would use the Mate desktop environment because it provided the modularity I needed to mold it into what I liked for ShockOS. Because you'll notice it's not complete vanilla Mate. It's a modified version of it. A little bit modified. And then it also had the performance with the least amount of screen tearing on the Raspberry Pi. And speaking of those two things, performance and screen tearing, they will have huge improvements with the next version of Raspberry Pi OS, codenamed Bookworm, because it will have Mate 1.26, which comes with so many performance improvements, and I just can't wait. So stay tuned for that. Now, Linux Mint is my favorite desktop operating system by far. While ShockOS obviously isn't based off Linux Mint, it does take some inspiration from it. A lot of the features are inspired by Linux Mint. Now let's talk about the features that I specifically programmed into ShockOS. I'm just going to list them off because there are quite a few. I've got the themes. So with ShockOS, I made it was already in the Mate desktop environment, but I made it a little bit easier and more user-friendly to choose between dark and light themes and different accent colors on the desktop. You also have the option to use custom themes, icons, and cursors to personalize your desktop a little bit more. Number 2, we've got parental controls. So you can create a child profile in ShockOS that cannot access any root commands, super user tasks, whatever, whatsoever. It can't do anything that needs super user privileges. And then you also have the option to set a daily screen time limit on that user so they can only be on for a certain amount of time every day. There are so many great wallpapers out there, and sometimes, at least if you're me, it can be hard to choose just one wallpaper. That's why I put the slideshow wallpaper feature in ShockOS, which lets you shuffle between multiple wallpapers in a folder, and you can shuffle through them in order or at random, and you can choose how long you want that wallpaper to be on the screen before it shuffles to a new one. With ShockOS, you don't have to choose just one wallpaper. You can have them all, baby. I also made it a lot easier to add and remove users in ShockOS. Again, the Mate desktop environment already had functionality for this, but it was not very user-friendly, so I decided to redesign it and make it a lot more user-friendly and easier, more straightforward. And you can create users, delete users, it's pretty self-explanatory what it does. But if you prefer to use the old Mate user manager instead of the one that I used, the one that I created, you can simply click advanced in the user manager and that will take you right back to the old version if you would rather use that instead of using the new user manager that I created. Of course, can't forget automatic updates. ShockOS also has this feature where instead of manually dragging the mouse and clicking the update icon in the system tray and entering your password, that's so much work, right? If you're too lazy to do that, then you can use the automatic updates, which whenever updates are available, your system will automatically install those updates. It's pretty self-explanatory what it does, and it just saves a little bit of hassle and makes things a lot more automated on your system to ensure that you stay up to date without having to constantly worry about updating your system. And if you want a complete list of all the GUI apps that I created for ShockOS, simply go to the start menu on ShockOS and type in Shock in the search bar and you'll find all the apps that I created for ShockOS. The ultimate goal of ShockOS is to provide the hands-down best desktop experience on the Raspberry Pi. That's why it comes ready to go right out of the box with plenty of features and customization options to make you feel right at home, and you can personalize your desktop to your liking. So with that, enjoy your experience. See you next time.